Welcome to another edition of War Master's Workshop Masterclass. Today we're going to be talking about and going through the process of brazing. Brazing is basically a low temperature method of welding metal, and it's how we make complex multi-part pieces of steel Mandalorian armor. Now, to give you a good example of a brazed piece, I've got this knee armor that I've produced using brazing techniques, and as you can see, you can tell where the braze is. And hopefully you can see this on the camera. There is a slight difference in metal color between the top and the bottom here, and the top and the bottom here on the clamshell. You'll see this kind of bronze colored area. You'll also see it around the joints here on the wing. And on the inside, more notably, you'll see it. That is actually brazed, where the metal has been welded together with a brazing rod. Brazing is not difficult. The most important part of it, as is with any part of armor production, is patience and knowing the right temperature and how you actually apply the braze to the heated metal, and knowing the tools. Now, to do brazing, I use a what's called an Oxy Map Pro setup. I'll slide this over as best I can so you can see it, but it's right here in the top right hand or left hand corner of your screen there. And this is just a Oxy Map Pro torch. It's very simple. It's very small. It's got a very small head on it here, and it produces a very small welding flame. That's about, it can get as long as several inches. But this setup right here will cost you around $50 to $75 for a decent one. This is a pretty good setup here that I've got. There are better ones out there that are a little more expensive, that come with different nozzles and different types of nozzles that you can use. Excuse me. This one is just fairly basic. I don't really need a whole lot of different nozzle types for what I do here. Just this one fine tip nozzle works fine for me. But there's also oxygen propane type out there that you can get, and those run around the same price. They can be upwards of $75 to $200+. It's all about what you need the tool to do. I only really need it to do brazing, so I only really need it for armor, so I don't have to have this a multiple solution setup here. It's pretty basic for what I need. Other tools you're going to need. You're going to need your striker here to set off the welder, or to get it started. You're going to need various types of channel locks or vice grips or locking pliers. There are the standard size or the standard type that you're probably used to seeing around. I've got little ones and I've got big ones. These little ones have seen a lot of use. As you can tell, they're pretty chewed up, but they still work. There's also this type right here. It's kind of like a big C-clamp. That's great if you need to hold something that's further in to the piece that you're working on. So I use it for that. Also, you can also use welding magnets. I've got some of those around here, but I don't have any sitting out here. And those are just huge magnets. Those are just really big magnets that allow you to hold one piece to another. Now, if you do use welding magnets, you don't want to weld right up to the magnet, because applying that much heat actually makes the magnet lose its magnetism. So they're mainly used to just join two pieces in one spot so that you can start welding in another spot and then take the magnet off, because you've got it already tacked together with weld or brazing rod. So you're going to need a vise. I have a little adjustable 360 degree vise here, and it allows me to, I can turn the item however way I want. It's actually really good because once you get the item in there, you may not want to move it, so you can just undo the collar down here, loosen the collar, and then move it however you need to. It's got a very wide base on it here, a triangular wide base, so it doesn't tip over easily. Now the next thing you're going to need is a brazing rod. Okay, this is a flux core or a flux coated bronze brazing rod. I like to use the bronze brazing rods because it's stronger than the silver brazing rods. They're slightly less expensive than the silver brazing rods. They do require a little bit more heat to melt than the silver does, but since we're going steel to steel, it doesn't really matter. The heat is less of an issue with those, or with these, than the steel ones, or the silver ones, I'm sorry. They also make aluminum brazing rods. They make all different types of brazing rods, but a bronze brazing rod is my favorite because it is stronger. It's got like around, I think it's rated for 60,000 psi. So once these are brazed together, once we get, once we put some braze on these, they're not popping apart. It's going to take, dropping the armor from a plane to get this stuff to break. Safety material, also, you want to make sure you've got gloves, okay? And you want a pair of darkened or shaded safety glasses. Now, one thing to remember about the brazing torch is that it doesn't get hot enough to produce ultraviolet rays. You have to get above 1600 degrees to produce ultraviolet rays. This does not produce that. It doesn't get hot enough for that, but it still gets pretty bright. It still gets pretty hot, and I do like to use shaded glasses here, just shaded safety glasses, just so I can see it a little bit better. And I'm actually going to go ahead and put these on now so that I'll have them on. But you can get those at any not even a welder supply store. Any hardware supply store will have shaded glasses like that. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started here. What we're going to do today, we're only going to need one of these on here, but what we're going to do is we're going to put together this this flat knee cop. Okay, it's what I use specifically for female armor, and actually it sits up like this when it's done. So this is the top portion, and of course this is the lower portion. This is the same pattern that's used for Legacy Mando armor. I haven't really modified it at all. There will be some some slight mods once we get it all put together, but we don't have to worry about that for this episode. But what we're going to do is we're just going to braze together these two areas here. It's pretty simple. It's a great piece to practice on because it doesn't require a lot of brazing, and it's a pretty simple piece to put together. So you can download these patterns off the Mandalorian Mercs website for this specific type of armor. And again, this is a Legacy Mandalorian knee armor. So, all right. So what we're going to do first is we're going to, I tell you what, let me pull the turning rod off the side of this. Here we go. Now, that way it doesn't get in my way and I'm not bumping the camera all over the place. All right, so we're going to just channel lock or vice grip in these corner pieces here because we want those to stay flush together. What's going to happen is as we heat the metal with the torch, it is going to, it will get it will start to weaken and it will want to move around. We don't want that to happen, so we have to lock these in place. Make sure that you've got enough tension on these so that they'll lock well. I need to add a little bit more here. There we go. That's what we want. You want it to be difficult to lock in. I mean, you want it to really feel like it's locked on there. And this one should be good out of the gate. Let's see. Yep. Now another thing you're going to want is, and I don't have it pictured because I have it kind of off to the side, you want a quenching bucket of some sort. Now you can use a standard, just a 5-gallon bucket. That's what I use, that I have a lid that I can put on it when I don't need to quench anything. But you're going to want to quench these after you get them hot, because if you don't, what happens is you're basically leaving them in a soft state, so that they're going to be the metal's going to be soft. It's going to be what's called annealed, and you've got to get that anneal out. You've got to get these hard again, or you got to make sure that you get them and keep them hard, especially along those joints. I'm less worried about hardening the entire piece and more worried about keeping these joints hard, because if they stay hard, then what that creates is it's like a soft, hard, soft, sort of like the same premise as a like a katana sword, where you have soft metal in the core, and then you've got, of course, your harder outer metal. It's sort of the same way here, where we want this part to be hard, but the metal around it to be soft, so that that metal will flex, but this part here will stay nice and hard and won't flex. That way it doesn't have the chances of it popping open, or the weld actually breaking or anything like that is very minimal. Now you see I put this another channel lock here on the bottom. The reason why I did that is because it's a great way to hold the piece in place, and plus when you've got it welded together, you've got an instant handle here. I'm going to raise the camera up a bit so that you can see exactly what I'm doing here. Alright, so we've got our piece on. We've got it locked in place. Make sure you've got your gloves on. Make sure you've got your eye protection on. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to strike our torch here. And to do that, I just open the fuel line on the fuel canister. Now, depending on what brand of torch you've got, that will you'll know what the fuel is and what the oxygen is. But we just want to open it enough. There we go. And then we turn it down a bit. We don't want the flame leaping off of the actual tip there. If you've got too much on it, you can see how the flame leaps off the tip. We want the flame on the tip. And you can actually bring this down a good little bit. And then we'll start turning on our oxygen. And be real careful, because it will start to flow pretty quick and it'll blow it out. So now we'll increase our fuel slightly. There we go. Now we've got our welding flame, our brazing flame, but we want to make that flame a little bit hotter, and to do that we release more oxygen, and as you can see the flame starts to shrink a bit. That's the shielding gas. And I'm going to add a little more fuel to it and bring a little more oxygen in, and there we go. Now we have our flame up to where we want it. I'm going to turn this slightly so you can see what I'm doing here. And all we're going to want to do first is just get the metal warm. We just want to warm the metal up, because this is similar to electronic soldering, where you just want to get the metal hot, and then you want the rod itself to actually flow onto the metal. You're not trying to really heat the solder up. Alright, now we've got some on here. Now what we're doing now is we're just heating the metal up, and the brazing solder actually follows. It will follow the heat in the metal. It'll follow it all the way down, and if you keep the heat out in front of the solder, it'll follow where that heat travels to. Now once you get down to a certain point, you're going to want to pop these off because you don't want to solder your channel locks on there, obviously. And you're going to want to take this solder all the way to the end. This of the braze it needs to go all the way to the end. Try to fill up as much of this as you can with the braze. But you want to try to keep it a smooth braze, because if you don't, it won't look good. Now I don't expect your first brazing attempts to look that nice, but let me go ahead and move this over so you can see it here. Alright, so here is our brazed area that we just did. And you can see it's fairly straight here. There's no real deformation. The braze is nice and concurrent all the way down. There's no gaps, there's no holes. It's let me lean this in. It spreads between both pieces of metal, and it fills in this gap fairly well. It's not going to be a perfect fill-in, and we will have to sand it down a bit, but it's a very good fill-in. And that's the kind of braze that you want. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn this around this way so we can get this side brazed. Alright, so just like we did before, we're going to heat the metal up, both sides of the metal. You don't want to get it too hot. You just want that heat, you just want it to get orange hot. You don't want it to get any hotter than that. Any hotter and you're going to get what's called fuming. And it's basically when you get the steel so hot that it starts to vaporize, and then it vaporizes this bronze brazing rod as well, and that creates some serious problems. So, alright, now we can go ahead and pop this channel lock off. Now you got to remember too that the other side where we've already brazed together is really, really hot. So do not touch that side, whatever you do. Not until we know it's cool. And you want to make sure you've got really good coverage of this braze. You want to make sure you've got it across both sides of the metal. And like I said, if you can watch the heat carry the braze down. Now what I'm going to do in here is I'm just going to heat this up. We're done brazing over here, so I'm going to heat this side back up. We're not going to get it super hot, but we're going to get it hot enough because we need to harden this side again. Right now it's annealed, as we talked about earlier. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to put a little bit of braze on this side. Just as sort of a good measure. And the same thing over here. We're going to add some braze over here as well. And cut. and action. Now you want to make sure when you're doing the inside here that you do not get it too hot that you melt your outside braze. What I normally do is I keep this flame a little bit cooler on the inside, so it takes longer for the braze to actually heat up. Now we don't have to do much on the inside, we just need a little bit, mainly just to keep it tacked. Because that's all we're doing is just tacking these pieces together on the inside, just to make sure we don't, it's just to strengthen that outside weld. So now we're done. Both sides are still hot. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to angle the camera down here a bit. We're just going to quench this by putting it right into the water. And once we do that, we've just hardened the metal. This metal is no longer annealed. It's nice and hard. And these joints aren't breaking anytime soon. So there we have those. Let's go do the other one. Alright, so we're going to just clamp this one back down like we had the other. Remember, you want to make sure that these are tight enough so that they lock, that they snap closed. You want to hear that snap. That snap is super important. Well, and you just have to get the corners. You don't have to get it, you don't have to put these channel locks way up in here. You just have to get the corners tacked down there with them. Once you got that done, you're good. You are good to go. Now we're going to take our large channel locks. We're going to lock it at the bottom, creating our handle. We're going to place it in the vise. Lock the bottom in. Now we tighten it up. I'll move the camera up a bit. All right. Also, save your little off pieces because you can actually tack those together and continue and add to your existing brazing rod. You don't want to waste those. I mean, they're not super expensive, but they're not super cheap either. So, you know, save what you can. Try to use as much of it as possible. There we go, perfect. Give it a little bit more fuel. And a little more oxygen. We don't want it too hot, but we want it hot enough. I try to keep the area, tools and such clear of the area. And again, we just want to get the metal around here nice and cherry hot. And then once we do that, we just start letting our brazing rod melt onto it. Then we keep warming the metal up, and it follows the heat on down. Pretty simple. Now the thing about the flux, the white coating on these rods, what the flux does is the flux actually cleans impurities out of the metal as you heat it up. So it gives the brazing rod a better surface to adhere to melt onto. There's two ways you can do the flux. You can either have it on the rod, just like this brazing rod has it on the rod, or you can buy powdered flux, which just comes as a powder, and what you do is you sprinkle that on the, or you put that on the, apply it to the metal first, and then you use an uncoated or a non-flex coated brazing rod at that point, because you wouldn't want to use a flux coated brazing rod on flux already. Alright, so let's turn this. But you can apply the flux, the powdered flux, and then just apply your uncoated rod, and it works the same way. I'm not sure if the uncoated rods are any cheaper than the flux coated rods. I just like the flux coated rods because it's one step I don't have to worry about. It's all taken care of in one part. But if you didn't have the flux on here, you would get an awful, awful brazed area. I mean, it's usually scorched and burnt and just really, really bad. And we want to avoid that at all costs. So it's just better to go ahead and get the flux coated rods so the flux melts down there to it as you're brazing. Alright, we've got the outside done, so we're just going to tack up the inside here a little bit. Let me turn that so you can see it. Since these areas are already pretty hot, it doesn't take long to heat them back up. And again, we just want just a real small tack inside. It doesn't have to be anything huge. Just a small little puddle. And that's it. Of course, I have a place where I hang the end of my torch up here. That way I don't have to worry about it getting in the way. Now, what we do now is we take this over to our quenching bucket, and we quench her off. And just make sure she's nice and cool. You'll get that first sizzle there when you put it in, and if you put it in one more time and you don't get that sizzle again, you know it's cool enough. But let's check our joints to make sure they're nice and hard. Yep, nice and hard. Alright, so we're going to take a moment just to look at these welds, these brazing welds, so you can see a little bit better how they look, how a finished weld, before you actually get onto the cleanup portion of it, but how a finished weld should look. So I'm going to hold this up to the camera as best as I can without it getting out of focus. Now, as you can see, the weld area is fairly thin. It's probably a total of a 1/4 inch weld. The weld spreads to both sides of the material. So we've got a 1/4 inch here, and you've got, well, you can see the brazing rod here that has spread to both sides of the material. If we look at it from this end, you can see that it is completely filled in, the gap is here. And then on the back, we have our one singular small tacked area, just as a support tack. Same on the other side, just our little support tack. And then again, we've got about a 1/4 inch width welded area here, nice fill in, and we know that the braze has spread to both sides of the metal. That constitutes a perfectly welded joint at that point. That's how we know it's welded properly. Same here, we're going to look at this one. We've got about a 1/4 inch weld thickness, great fill in, and we know that it is spread to both sides. Same over here, about a 1/4 inch in thickness, excellent fill in, and spread to both sides. We've got our tack weld here and our tack here. And remember, these are just support tacks. They're not full-on. They're not full-on welds like out here, brazed welds, because we just want a little bit of support back there. But at this point, that's really it for the welding. You can use this for regular knees. You know, if you're doing standard type Mando knees, you can use it for gauntlets. The big piece of advice I would give is to don't be in a hurry with it. That's a surefire way to lose metal if you're in a hurry. Also, watch your heat. You don't have to have a very hot flame to do brazing. I mean, it needs to be hot enough to heat the metal up to about cherry red, so that or a light yellow, so that the braze will properly move. But you don't need a very hot flame for brazing. It's not like actual welding where you have to, where you're melting a steel rod, or using a tungsten wire or something of that nature to melt that and join two pieces. We're using a lower melting temperature metal such as bronze or even silver to do the joining of the pieces. So you don't have to have a super hot flame. The hotter the flame, the more chance of fuming you're going to get and blowing holes in your metal and just really making your welds look bad. You want to keep that from happening at all costs. So keep a lower flame. Practice a lot before you start actually working on your armor. Practice on just scrap pieces of steel and a brazing rod, clamp them together, and start brazing. You're not going to hurt anything. You might waste a little bit of gas, and you may waste a little bit of brazing rod, but it's a better idea to do that than it is to actually ruin a piece of armor that you've already cut out, that you've already put a significant amount of time into creating. So practice up. Don't be afraid to practice. You can braze different types of metals as well. You can braze aluminum. You can braze brass. You can braze bronze. You can braze steel. You can braze just about any type of metal. It's a little bit easier to braze different types of metal than it is weld because of their lower temperatures. But you can braze, for instance, brass to steel. So if you wanted to create, let's say, an armor filigree, and you wanted to attach that to a piece of, a brass filigree that you wanted to attach to a piece of steel armor, you would braze those two pieces together. You'd braze that brass to the steel armor piece. And that will work out much better in your favor than trying to weld it, because the brass has a lower melting temperature than steel. You're going to destroy the brass. So braze is your best option. If you learn how to braze together armor pieces, then you can move on to finer things like brazing two different types of metal together to get a specific look that you're going for. So anyway, that's it. That's all we've got for this masterclass. If you have any questions, you're always feel free to contact me at Mandalore@mandalorianworks.com. You can also visit my Facebook page at Mandalore the Uniter, or you can hit me up on Patreon. Just look for War Masters Workshop. We appreciate any support that you want to throw our way to keep these tutorials going. And we'll see you in the next workshop episode.